It is good morning to you over in South Africa. How are you today, my friend?
I'm good. I'm good. It's wonderful to be here with you. I think in the States it's in the evening, but it's lovely to be with you this morning here in South Africa.
Yes, it is officially 2 a.m. here in Chicago, Illinois. And here we are going into the 16th hour, and we have about 8 hours to go here, Keri.
Well done. You guys have really run a marathon.
Well, let me just introduce. I could sit here and talk about your bio and all that stuff, but I rather just actually hear from you in person. Keri, you work as the executive head of the Zwani Group, which is part of Mergon. Number one, tell me a little bit of what Zwani and Mergon does, and how did you get to do what you're doing?
Mm. I'll give you a little bit of the backstory of how I ended up at Mergon. It really is a God story. I think everybody at Mergon has a God story about how they ended up here, and then I'll tell you a bit more about Mergon and the role that I perform here within Nation Builder and Zwani. It was more than 10 years ago now. I studied biochemistry. I was in the biochemical industry, and I really wanted something that was just a little bit more purposeful. And I ended up chatting to somebody at my church about the social development landscape or working with not-for-profits, and we just had a nice coffee, and they didn't know that I was really wanting to do something different. And about a week later, this lady called me and said, we'd love for you to come for an informal chat at Mergon. We've got a new role that we're opening up. And so totally outside of what I had studied or what I was busy with. And that lady is now actually one of my colleagues. And it was just such a God appointment for me to join Mergon. And so fast forward 10 years, still part of the Mergon team, and really, really just enjoy being part of what God is doing. So what Mergon is we're an investment company that exists to create kingdom impact and try to journey with others who are wanting to do the same. And so Mergon has three sort of divisions, if you want to call it, or three focus areas within it. The first is the investment team, and they focus on for-profit investments. Then we have our foundation team, who focuses on distributing resources or a portion of our proceeds into the rest of Africa for kingdom expansion, as well as focusing on sort of organizational health within the not-for-profit space. And then we have the third team, that is the one that I head up, is called the integrate team. And so what we do is we work with businesses. It's always with business around how do you steward what you've been entrusted in a way that is going to transform hearts and impact society so that it will move toward being a flourishing and just society. And so within Integrate, there's two legs. It's Nation Builder and Zwani. And so Nation Builder is all about strengthening the social fabric of your country. And so it's very much Jeremiah 29, seeking the peace and prosperity of the place you've been exiled to. And then Zwani is all about living out your kingdom calling and stewarding your business in totality in alignment with what God has planned for your business as a business leader.
Yeah. So for ever since you started at Mergon, have you always been part of the integrate team?
So when I joined Mergon, we were much smaller as an organization. So back then, our team was actually called Matobi. It was a different brand. But we focused very much on sitting between the not-for-profit and the business world. And as time's gone by, the initiatives have grown. And so as more initiatives have been collected, our structure's shifted. So the Integrate team is now sort of the big brother of what I started working on.
Very good. Hey, before we start talking a little bit about Zwani and Integrate and everything that you're doing with Nations Builder, biochemistry, what were you hoping to do with biochem?
I love the way the human body is put together. I find it fascinating, and I find science fascinating. So when I went to university, I think leaving matric or leaving your final year at school is quite daunting. You don't really know what to go into. So I thought of medicine, I thought of many other things, but ultimately it was a good journey for me. It taught me a lot of the way of thinking, scientific way of thinking, which was lovely. And it was a real God journey. I was fascinated by how intricately God has put on a chemical reaction level, even how God has orchestrated things like how muscles move and cells communicate with one another. So yeah, biochemistry is a passion, and I still love it, but I enjoy what I do now too.
Okay, and let me ask you another personal question, and we'll go back to Mergon as well too. Some people were listening to it and says, Keri, You studied biochem, or you studied in the area of biology or chemistry, sciences all your life, a good portion of your life. How did you know that God wants you to pivot and do what you're doing right now? How did you know, Keri?
I think I knew because there was a deep yearning in my heart for something different, for something that was really going to be part of what God had planned for his people. And so I truly love people, and I truly love seeing people flourish. It's probably one of my the giftings or the passions that God has given me. And so in the roles that I was in within biochemistry, the subject matter was really fascinating, but I wasn't able to engage with people to the same level where it was an unlocking of flourishing and sort of giftings. It was more sort of looking at a microscope, which was fascinating, but it didn't have the people element. And so I think it was just the desires that God's given me that really pointed me in that direction. But then he also just flung doors open, and it was very clear that it was him. And so yeah, I think it's a mix of both passion and just where God opens doors, and where you just feel at peace and you are finding joy.
Yep. You started off by talking about the third arm of Mergon, the integrate team. And under it, there is the nation builder and also Zwani. I know a lot of times you and I met through the introduction of Zwani, which in some sense officially launched this past July. Talk to me a little bit about some of the projects that you're working under Zwani, as well as the over at Nation Builder.
Yeah, so Zwani and Nation Builder have quite different focuses, but we use very similar methodology in both initiatives. So everything that we do is all about co-creation, collaboration, and community. And so both of them harness that power of the collective to be able to, one, learn from one another in community and have brothers and sisters that are on this journey with you. And then secondly, to capture that information so that more people can gain access to the richness and multifacetedness of the collective's knowledge. And so with Nation Builder, our most recent project is our impact management guideline. It took us over 2 years to, as a community, we came together every 6 weeks and we're looking at what would be a way to standardize the way we do impact reporting in South Africa, because it's quite diverse and we have no sort of foundation of how to approach it. And so quite exciting, the product got launched actually this year in March. And so we are busy in the process in trying to roll it out as far as possible to standardize impact reporting. Similar with Zwani, we did over about 7 months, we had a group, an advisory panel of business leaders that came together and helped craft some resources. And the resource is actually called Doing Business Differently, which is the 10-part series that looks at what are some of the aspects that these people believe that are important for us to engage around scripturally in how we live out our kingdom calling in the marketplace. So both very exciting products that were developed and communities that have been built.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about the first one, impact reporting in South Africa. How did you guys look at impact reporting in South Africa? What are the things that you guys learned that maybe some of us here in Chicago could learn from what you guys are doing?
So I think a lot of it was really just trying to get the foundations in place. The reality is there's so many voices that come into South Africa, and I think we have it the world over. There's so many different ways that you could do it, and there's so many different approaches that you can never compare apples with apples. And so we really just sifted through reams and reams and reams of different ways of doing things to go, what is going to work for us and what is simple enough for your smaller not-for-profits to be able to do, as well as your mega not-for-profits, so that we can all actually have similar ways of doing things. So for example, a very simple thing is a theory of change. How do we empower people to all have a theory of change that looks at what your impact is going to be, so that we can actually start getting indicators that actually point toward the impact that you ultimately want to achieve in the long term? And so your small organizations can do that, and so can your mega organizations. So those kinds of things, it's really the sort of 101 of impact reporting. It's just getting that basic foundation in place so we can start building on as a nation going forward to standardize impact reporting.
And then is your hope then, once you roll it out, you create education around it, and eventually the hope is that as funding comes along, or as you work with different nonprofits, they're using some of these standards to report on how well they're doing?
Absolutely. So we currently have masterclasses. So that's very much an educational approach. The guides are freely available, but we have masterclasses that people are attending. We're training up consultants who are running out masterclasses because the idea is exactly that, that
Yeah.
as many people as possible are utilizing this sort of foundational thinking.
So before you guys got onto the stage and started developing that, how were people coming back and reporting impact to you?
I think it was just very ad hoc. So it
Got it.
depended. People that are busy working with USAID have a very, very robust way of reporting and very much aligned with American standards. Some of your smaller organizations have very little reporting going on because they've got funders or partners that are a lot more trust based. And so the spectrum is just vast. And so, what are some of we're really just putting those building blocks in place of what are some of the bare bones that we need to be able to
Interesting.
start walking this journey together.
Very, very good. And with Zwani, are you guys bringing groups? Where are you guys finding business leaders from? Is it Pretoria that you're working in? Is it Cape Town? Is it Johannesburg? Or is it Stellenbosch where you're at? Which parts of South Africa are you guys working in?
Yeah, so Zwani, the word Zwani actually is a Swahili word, and it means at the lake. And why we chose the Swahili word is because our heart is really that this is something that will serve Africa, and so the most commonly spoken language in Africa is Swahili, and the whole idea of the theme of at the lake is how do you having a place where people can come, be refreshed, drink in the word, find community, and then go back out into the world. And
Yeah.
so when we launched Zwani in June, we actually had people from multiple countries around Africa. We do have a critical mass in South Africa, so it's all parts of South Africa that are part of our communities. And we actually have continental groups, which is quite exciting. So we have communities where we have people from all different countries in Africa that are meeting every month and going through this doing business differently content together and learning about one another's cultures and worldviews and what the gospel means to them
Yeah.
in those spaces.
So Zwani Group is not just limited to South Africa. You're covering the entire continent.
I think our desire is to serve the continent. And so wherever there are people that want to come together and walk a journey together that are from different contexts, there's a richness in God is just so colorful. And the more we connect across borders, the more we understand the depth of what God's doing. And I think our biggest passion is that God is doing incredible stuff in Africa, and he has been doing it for many
Yes.
years. And so to be able to together celebrate that and unpack some of that, and showcase it together and be celebrate and excited about what God's doing, I think is the thing that the Zwani community is really the most passionate about.
Yeah. With what you're doing at Zwani, are you drawing more entrepreneurs? Are you drawing more corporate guys? Are you drawing more younger, older? What type of people are drawing into what you are doing, or is it a mix of everything?
So we're mostly focusing on business leaders, so people that sort of have influence within their businesses. But I mean that's varied. So you have your startup entrepreneur who has a small company that's really wanting to position his business well from the get-go. And then you have your exceptionally seasoned entrepreneurs or seasoned business leaders who have been walking this journey for many years and are wanting to partner with peers. I think the secret is when the groups form with peers. So people of either a similar age or a similar phase of business experience, however, still from different genders, different backgrounds, different countries. And so there's a diversity, but there's also a understanding in sort of a peer group.
Yeah. Keri, when you first started and came to Mergon and then started Zwani Group, integrate all of that, did you have all of this in mind, or did it evolve based upon what you started seeing was happening?
Definitely didn't have all of this in mind. We actually talk at Mergon, we often talk about our unfolding purpose. And so as we are faithful, God sort of unfolds more. And so we just walking in obedience to what he's doing. And so as we step in obedience and take the next step, God will often reveal more to us about what he's busy with. So yeah, I love the term an unfolding purpose. And so we really do believe that at Mergon.
Yeah. Speaking of unfolding purpose, even in terms of what you started when you first got into Mergon to where you are now, how is the business leader, the marketplace leader conversation? How is it changing? How is it evolving in the context of Africa?
I think there's a deep desire in the business leader conversation. Well, twofold. One is, if you think about it with Zwani, there is a deep desire to live out your marketplace calling. I think our churches, and I think it's probably the world over, but our churches have shifted from the only sort of way of being in ministry is on a Sunday or in a church structure, whereas people are seeing more and more that your actual ministry can be through the marketplace. So that's been a wonderful shift that's happened over years. And then the second is around social development. It's people are so passionate about how do we invest in our social fabric, because it's important to be able to be part of strengthening our nation, and the people are that there's opportunities for everybody. And so those two things have stood out over the last probably 10 years. But there's also a growing need for people to feel like there's African solutions from Africa. And so there's a big desire to start sort of finding out the African voice, and sort of being acknowledged for the fact that there are incredible things that are happening, and that we can learn from one another, or we can learn from others in our continent who have been pioneering for many years, but we may not have known about it. And so I think that's also been an interesting shift to see within the landscape, and that's probably happened over about the last 6 years.
Very good. Do you feel like, and it's happened in the last 6 years, has technology helped us? Because in some sense, the world has become smaller. So suddenly now, from what a little bit I understand, Africa is becoming more mobile in terms of its development. Has that helped in terms of changing and create opportunities for you guys at Zwani?
Definitely. I mean, I think COVID has definitely even taken it to the next level. So it's been incredible to see how COVID has impacted on the communication amongst people in Africa. But we also have things where there's a push, like we have the Africa Free Trade Agreement. So there's also structures or legal structures or policies that are coming into place that are also trying to make Africa work better together and come up with solutions together. So from all angles, it's been amplified, but COVID has definitely amplified it even more. I mean, I've seen on the philanthropy side how there's a sudden uptick of how do we find African solutions to our problems? Our context is different. People are reinventing things, some of the concepts around impact investment, around impact management, and just great conversations throughout the continent about, well, what does it look like here? Because we actually can't adopt everything that we get from other areas, because our socioeconomic divides are just so severe. And so that's been incredible to see those conversations just skyrocket due to COVID. I think one, because of technology, but two, because the needs have just increased as well.
Yeah, very, very good. Do you find pastors of churches understand what you all are doing? Or is it still a work in progress?
I do think that the church in general is more and more moving toward wanting to empower and equip the people that are in the marketplace to do God's work. So I do think that there is a desire to be able to equip your congregations. I think on the social development front, it's probably a little bit less. We talk a lot about, charity or helping, sort of serving the orphans and the widows and those kinds of things, but the actual concepts of development work and what the development principles are, the church hasn't necessarily engaged deeply in that conversation, but there is a deep desire to understand, I think. And I think more and more there is a desire to journey in understanding what it looks like to live out your calling in the marketplace. So the desire is there, and I think we're on the journey.
Yeah. You recently had a gathering in Stellenbosch. I mean, one of our board members, Tony, you met. I also know that you went to Nairobi. We were chatting about that you did some stuff with different leaders from around the world. I'm from America. And when you talk about collaboration, how do you work effectively with, let's give an example, Americans? How, when you want to highlight African voices or African solutions, how does a Western church, how does a church in London, how does a church in Sydney or Singapore, how do you work with people who are different? And even in our context, how do you work with the American church?
So I think maybe I'll bring it back to South Africa, because I'm aware of speaking beyond my my own context. But even within South Africa, and these principles we use now as we are wanting to work in other areas or walk a journey in sort of other countries. And the principles in social development and within our context in South Africa is you can come into spaces, and by virtue of who you are, there's a power perception. And so how are we exceptionally aware of some of the unspoken realities that come into the room with us, and then intentionally deconstruct them? And so come in and actually take a side seat often. So if you're going into a community, by virtue of your socioeconomic bracket, you might come with more power. And so how do you intentionally step aside and be and listen and learn and actually encourage and support and come alongside, because it's very easy for people to just very quickly hand the power over to you and wait for solutions, but actually those aren't going to be the right solutions. And so that's a lot of the development thinking that we've learned within South Africa that I think we try to use in different spaces. And so therefore go in with a humble heart and a heart of learning wherever we are.
Got it. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out how I can best say this. So I'm going to be very direct as well. How do you work sometimes? And I'm going to say this as an American. So Keri, is sometimes with Americans, they feel like we're the leaders. They feel like we have all of the answers. They feel like the world has to learn from us. How then do you work with partners who may feel that way and learn how to manage those partners in a very collaborative way?
I think it's important to have good discussions. I think sometimes there's a friend of mine who has an emotional intelligence course, and they have this saying that you have cream cheese. It's like when there's cream cheese on the side of your mouth and everyone can see it, but you can't. Yeah. And how important it is to actually tell the person about the cream cheese, because it gets embarrassing. And I think one of the things that we found is it's really important to actually, in love, because we really care about the greater vision that God's busy with, actually help one another see our blind spots. And we will have blind spots ourselves as much as somebody else will have blind spots. So how do we in love help each other see the blind spots, so that the enemy wants to come and divide? And so those are all just plans. The cream cheese or the blind spots are all plans for division. And so if we can in love point out each other's blind spots, we can actually find each other and we can stay united and we can really do God's work.
Yeah. And Keri, the reason why I asked this is I also realize that sometimes for me as an older male, let's say, for instance, I started doing work in Indonesia. And so I find with the folks over in Asia are very respectful, even the folks in Africa as well, too. And so being the American male, automatically they defer to me. I had to learn to intentionally give power away. And I realize a lot of times in the Asian context, they may not tell you these things. Now, whether or not we've agreed something they do it is a whole different story, but it's learning how to build trust, to have meaningful dialogue. And I realized I had to learn how to listen, empower them, and encourage them. But I also realized that some people don't think about that. They may see silence as a sign of weakness and say, well, let me just tell you what to do. So it becomes a certain dynamic. You're going to have to work through some of those things.
Absolutely. I think there's this, I love this one example that comes from South Africa, where there's a group of people from a business that really wanted to invest in a community that was in a lower socioeconomic bracket. And so the staff were going and giving maths lessons to the students. And somebody said to them, do you know that you are re-emphasizing historic stereotypes that are unhelpful for the identity of the children? That's a huge thing to tell someone. And so then people said, well, but then how do we, so what, should we just pull out? And they said, no, but we can do this differently. So what they did was they said, the children are going to teach you, I think it was Zulu. So the children are going to teach you Zulu, and then you're going to teach them maths. And that exchange was incredible, because the children's confidence went up by so much, because they realized that these adults actually weren't very good at Zulu and kept forgetting the words and kept not being able to get it right. Exactly. Very similar to sometimes maths was difficult for the children. And it suddenly leveled the playing fields. And they were like, oh, these people don't know it all. Actually, there's areas where I have giftings that they don't have. And so that was just such a beautiful example of don't come in and just teach, but come in and be taught.
Yeah.
And you can still bring yourself into the room and bring your gifting and your skill sets, but also be taught. And then that actually levels the playing fields.
Yeah. And Keri, one of the things I've also learned in my travels in Asia and also Nairobi is God has a plan for the city way before I ever showed up. All right. When he created the world, he had a plan. My job is purely to listen to what God's plan is, to learn to exegete the community, to listen and be part of God's plan. And it allows us to learn to depend on each other, to listen to each other, and learn to work with each other.
It actually reminds me so much of 1 Corinthians 12. I know we use that so much around the body of Christ, but it's just God gave us different expressions of his, or manifestations of his
Correct.
Spirit. And so if we just let one manifestation of his Spirit become the dominant voice, we have just squashed so many other manifestations of his Spirit that are just hindering us from actually seeing the beauty and the multifacetedness of our Father.
Like, for instance, even me and you, I think I've gotten to know you a little bit more so now in the last couple months. My life is better in the last couple years since I've met Peter and Francois over at the Mergon Foundation. Through that, I got to meet DeWitt and Neo and Marnus, and now I'm getting to meet you. I'm learning something from my brothers and sisters in South Africa. You're helping me to see something different that a guy here in Chinatown, Chicago probably wouldn't have learned. And it just comes with us learning to have mutual respect and honor for each other within the bigger, larger community as a church.
Absolutely. Yeah. I fully agree.
Last question. And I'm actually going to take a different spin. When I talk with you, you are extremely competent. You are extremely bright. And this is just a little bit of what I know about you. And I think a lot of times when we look at the world today, there is a growing sense of the presence of women leaders who are doing wonderful things within the global church. Sometimes they're always not very encouraged upon to lead. What is your encouragement for female leaders within the church or marketplace leaders within their city? What would you say to them?
Sure. So much. I'm very passionate about just women in leadership. I think God has, again, it's that whole idea of the multifacetedness of the body. And so women have a different skill set and have a different approach in the way that we do things. And so actually having ladies in leadership alongside men and with other people again adds a depth and a richness. And there's something I encourage women to never want to be anything that you're not. Be fully you and be fully woman and be everything that God has actually gifted you to be in those spaces, because that's what those spaces need. Those spaces, God wants us to bring ourselves in totality and to bring the giftings and the skill sets and the way that God wired us as women into the marketplace. And because it's actually a blessing in all contexts to have all those different voices. And so I think I'd encourage women to not try and be something that you're not, and to be fully you, and also just to really seek deeply in the word. There's a lot of interesting or opinion, I'd rather say. There's a lot of interesting opinion about the role of women, and there's read those things, but also go to the word and really go and dive deeply in the word and speak to God about what he has said about the role of women and different women within scripture. I think it really just helps with our identity. It helps with our understanding of what God has positioned us to be.
Yeah. Keri, it's a pleasure hearing about you and the work of Mergon and Zwani to integrate and everything that you're doing, not only in South Africa, but also Africa as well. So thank you on this Saturday morning for you. I know you have a baby shower to go to, so thank you for joining us.
Just lovely to spend this time with you, Tommy, and good luck for the rest of the 7 hours.
We'll talk soon.